And it's time for another Fjordhammer book review. And today I've got something different. It's not actually a book, it's an audio drama. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's instead of being a read-on book like an audio book, it's a actual radio theater piece. So it's got voice acting, it's got special effects, it's got music, it's got everything. Now, the audio drama I'm going to review today is The Hunt for Nagash by Josh Reynolds. Many of you might remember this when it was released. It was a pretty big deal back then. But many of you who've come in maybe since the General's Handbook might not have heard about this. So that's why I'm telling you about it today. It's written by Josh Reynolds. It's set during the Realmgate Wars era, so it's not set in any new setting. It's rather old in the timeline sense, and it's a audio drama divided into 4 parts. The Hunt for Nagash is actually the first of 2 parts. You got the Hunt for Nagash and the Knights of Vengeance, which deals with the aftermath of the Hunt for Nagash part, but I'm not going to talk about that today. The Hunt for Nagash itself is divided into the Prisoner of the Black Sun, which is the first part, Sands of Blood, Lords of Hellstone, and the Bridge of Seven Sorrows. And each of these hour-long sections roughly make up the Hunt for Nagash. Now, some of you might be asking right now, why am I covering an audio drama? Well, because it's an audio drama, and because at the point of this release, the only audio drama that has been released for the Age of Sigmar. If any of you are interested in 40k or the Horus Heresy, you know that Games Workshop makes a lot of audio dramas for those series, but this is the only one we have for Age of Sigmar, and it's especially interesting because of that. It also focuses on the realm of death in ways that a lot of the other books don't. This was actually, back in the day, our very first meeting with the realm of death. So, as a death player, this holds a special place in my heart. It's got a really, really cool part because it has monologues by Nagash himself. So if you're interested in what the Lord of Undeath thinks and feels about the world as it is, this is where you're going to hear about it. You also get the return of a certain von Karstein vampire, who was certainly not expected to return in the way he did, but here he is. And if any of you have listened to podcasts such as Hammer or a lot of other things, this is where the the Age of Sigmar meme of only the faithful comes from. And where does it come from? Well, the heroes of this story are the Bullheart Chamber of the Hallowed Knights, led by, of course, Tarsus Bullheart. And if you don't know anything about the Hallowed Knights, they're the out of all the fanatics of the Stormcast Eternals, the Hallowed Knights are above and beyond the religious fanatics. They believe as long as they have faith in Sigmar, they can conquer anything. And so they ask a lot of rhetorical questions, like who shall be triumphant? And their answer is always only the faithful. And it's sort of become a thing in the community. If you go to an event and if you go to a major event and shout who shall be triumphant, you're probably going to get a few guys shouting back only the faithful. It's at the end of it's in every Heel and Hammer episode. It's also at the end of every Garage Hammer episode, I believe. And this is sort of where it's really from. The story is about this Bullheart Chamber of the Hallowed Knights Stormhost going out and being given the task of trying to find Nagash. Now, this is at the start of the Realmgate Wars. Nagash and Sigmar have been enemies for hundreds of years. They aren't on speaking terms. And now Nagash is missing. They don't know where he is. And in an attempt to sort of rally his old pantheon and bring Nagash back into the fold to help Nagash, help the realm of death, and make sure that the undead in all the other realms focus on killing chaos instead of killing each other or killing order. He's sent out 8, 9 warrior chambers to find Nagash, find the entrance into the underworld of the Age of Sigmar, and find him in his lair. Along the way, they have many great adventures, obviously, but the most interesting part, and the not twist, but the element that makes this really interesting is that they meet Manfred von Karstein, the betrayer, the destroyer of the old world, and his contrast and his scheming, conniving nature in contrasting with Tarsus of the Hallowed Knights, who believes in faith and believes in Sigmar, but doesn't trust his vampire, notably. That sort of duo forms the heart of this audio drama series. I won't tell you how it ends or anything. I'll just mention a bit about each story. Prisoner of the Black Sun. You might guess who that prisoner is. Obviously, it's someone that they're going to meet. Sands of Blood. They come to this huge desert, which is red and disgusting. And Manfred mentions how the people of this region, which was once fertile, rose up against Nagash, and he crushed them. He crushed them so hard that the red sand of the desert is literally their dried blood. It's amazing. They also meet some pilgrims here who are on their way to somewhere. So that's sort of the story of that one. Funny enough, Sands of Blood, a very, very literal title in this case. Lords of Hellstone, on their search to the archway that will lead them into Styx, they need to go to Hellstone to grab an artifact that will show them the way. Hellstone was once a great mortal city, and of course has some backstory connected to the previous lives of the Stormcast Eternals. Probably the strongest of the 4 stories, but they're all good, honestly. And ending this 4-part story, this 4-part first half of a 8-part story, is Bridge of Seven Sorrows, in which I won't spoil anything, but there's several reasons this bridge is known as having 7 sorrows. I'll leave it at that. I often ask myself, and I ask of every book I read for Age of Sigmar, does this capture the imagination? And for me, this really, really does. The descriptions are vivid. The voice acting is really, really good. You can really imagine these characters, especially when I was re-listening to this afterwards. Just Tarsus's sass. I mean, he's not a sassy, like, smart-mouthed character, but he he insults even like Khorne lords for talking too much and not fighting enough. He's great. And it's really, really interesting to imagine these larger than life characters as being actual characters. Sometimes reading campaign books or even battle tomes can be a bit abstract, can be a bit far away from the character. But here they really put us into them and let us, if not understand them, at least follow them. and I think that works really, really well. I mean, this tempts me just to build a Hallowed Knights chamber, and I already struggle with not doing that because of Gardas. I love the little like only the faithful chant and shout. It's a bit embarrassing because it's obvious that the Black Library audio team doesn't have 100 6 foot tall men in armor to shout this. Like there's only a few voices, but it's so endearing. It's just it's not as silly as it might sound. Manfred, of course, is always interesting because if you know his backstory from the world that was, as I do, he's his moniker. I mean, I can't say Manfred von Karstein without also calling him the Betrayer because that is what he is to me. Um, in the transition to the Age of Sigmar, there's some elements there that haven't transitioned in a sense. I think Nagash knows very well what happened. I'm not sure if Manfred actually remembers. But essentially, Manfred's betrayal at the end of the world that was, at the end of the end times, was the final nail in the coffin for the old world. And obviously, that makes him a not very reliable guy. So there's an underlying tension in the entire story. Will he betray them? Or rather, when will he betray them? And I really like that because, well, like, without spoiling anything, he doesn't seem to be so bad when he's talking. I also love Manfred's voice in this. He just sounds like such an arrogant fool. Well, not an arrogant fool, an arrogant. He just sounds so arrogant and above it, and really, he sounds untrustworthy but also powerful. And his voice is just it is very well voiced as well. And as I mentioned, it's just the immersion in this book is just unlike what you'd get in the campaign books or even in the other novels. That's why this medium exists because it's different from the books, and it works. And the production values are excellent. The there's voices, there's a lot of voices, there's a lot of sound effects like the clashing of battles, the roar of animals. Uh, there's creepy music and combat music and marching sounds when the troops out marching, and it's just a joy to listen to. So that just just works for me. Just makes the Mortal Realms feel a lot more alive than they used to be, or they might have been if you haven't been into the Mortal Realms in any way. This is one good way to make it feel alive in a way that maybe the campaign books won't do for you. I've talked quite a bit about the characters already because it's such a character focused story. But I'll just mention it again. You've got my personal favorite aspect of this is Nagash's monologues. I love Nagash as a character. He is the god of death. He is smarter than everyone else. He is by far the most powerful character we've met in this book, met in any of the books, really. Uh, Perhaps matched by Alariel. Probably not. This guy can single-handedly and quite likely defeat Archeon in combat. Other than Archeon himself, Nagash is probably the most dangerous being in the mortal realms. And hearing his monologues and how he thinks about the world and what he thinks about the Stormcast Eternals is really, really fascinating, especially, or rather doubly so, for me as a death player and a guy who's painted his giant model. I mentioned Tarsus and Manfred. Very, very. you just live into them, you know? They come alive from the MP3, from the audio file. You also got characters like Ramus, some of the characters they meet on the way, and of course all the chaos guys that they fight along the way. Uh, Nothing amazing there, but there's a couple of characters that you will really like, or that there's a couple of secondary characters that just make the work a lot better. And yeah, well, the production values are high. It's just a fun listen to. I listen to this not like often because it's just a single story in a sense. Each segment is about an hour long, 50 minutes maybe. And I listen a lot. I listen to it when I paint. I just put this on while I'm painting. If say there isn't a podcast out, or my favorite YouTube series haven't updated, or if I've already watched it or whatever, I'll just put this on because the plot isn't so complicated. The basic idea they're trying to find Nagash and essentially just walking around is really simple. You don't you don't have to like put down your pencils. It's like, oh, what was that plot point? Just it explains itself like in a way that you might not get from say an audio book. I've listened to quite a few audiobooks, and if the plot in those are any more complicated than say your average fantasy novel, you need to concentrate to get what's happening. You know, understanding The Lies of Locke Lamora on audiobook is a lot easier than understanding Game of Thrones on audiobook. And this one is a lot more in complexity along the lines of Lies of Locke Lamora, if you've heard that, or if you've read that. So it's there's enough happening that it's interesting to listen to the entire time, but not so much and not so complex that you need to like hunker down in your favorite chair and listen intently to the story. This is excellent, like uh, on the drive home, painting, background noise at a gaming club. Well, maybe not that one because there's dialogue, but just if you're just relaxing with something and want to have something in the ears, this is great stuff. So I mentioned that this is set in the early Realm Gate Wars. If you know a bit about the Realm Gate Wars, you know that towards the end, they do actually get in contact with Nagash, a different group, and there is some sort of deal struck, and things happen. So this is set before that, and it fills out sort of a bit of a gap. It sort of shows almost a sort of minor side story, like you get in a campaign book a minor like, oh, and Sigmar sent out his troops to find the other gods. And then you go, this is the story of one of those troops. And you can very easily imagine yourself having, say, Celestial Vindicators doing the same thing, but for Gorka Morka. And the book, it gives you a lot of insight into Manfred, first and foremost, but also into Nagash and the realm of death itself. Not quite as much as, say, the Lord of Undeath does, but it's an excellent combo to the Lord of Undeath, which is the 10th book in the Realm Gate Wars series. Like, if you have these two together, you've got a pretty clear understanding of who the Great Necromancer is. It also shows a very different aspect of the Stormcast Eternals. We're used to them being a bit cookie cutter, like especially if you don't really read any of the stories and don't have an impression that the Stormcast Eternals are any different. This book will show you that they are. The Bullhearts are a lot more, they're aggressive. I mean, they've got a bull as their sort of moniker. Ridiculous English words. And after like all their formations have like the bull's horns names, and that's really silly. but they have they have their own personality, which is separate from, say, the Steel Souls of Gardus's Stormhost or Warrior Chamber. And I thought that was I really like that. You could really come to like this Warrior Chamber in its own right, really. This is also a book, not a book, audio drama that really can really tie into the hobby, I think. You've got terrain ideas, red sand, anyone, the sands of blood terrain. That would be amazing and very, very appropriate for the Age of Sigmar. I mean, you could make almost a Mars-ish terrain table, but have the basic idea that this is dried and caked up blood, which is just disgusting. You can build a story around Hellstone, which is just fascinating. It's a great location that I really hope they'll use a lot because it has so much potential. It's such a potential rich location in the mortal realms. It's clearly in the realm of death, but it used to be a human stronghold, like regular mortal humans, until the Age of Chaos. And it has a lot more backstory, but I'll leave that to you guys to listen. But it's just, you can easily create your own backstory for Hellstone, and it would just slot right in with all the other stuff that exists. And this story, as well as the stuff about Gardus, really makes me want to make a Hallowed Knight Warrior Chamber because they're super cool. And every time I do something, I can shout, "Only the faithful!" And that'll pretty much guarantee me sixes on the dice. You could base your faction around Manfred. I mean, Manfred's a big player in this book, and he shows some of the versatility of death as a faction, and some of the really, really disgusting and maybe parts that you haven't thought so much about when it comes to death. Basing an army around Manfred as he appears in these stories is very easy. I think that would be a very intuitive faction and a very intuitive army. And just thinking about it now, without spoiling anything, it could probably be a pretty good army as well. There's quite a few combos already that's popping to mind. And the last sort of thing that really interests me, maybe as a sort of hobby thing, is the final scene of the story. For those of you who haven't listened to my previous coverage, I created a diorama for the South Coast GT event, which I brought and I showed it, and it's on my Facebook and on my Twitter if you want to see it. And I could really see myself doing a diorama of this last scene as well, because it's just so evocative and different. Really, it's just not something it stands out. I think everyone who's listened to this and listened to that final scene would remember it and knows exactly what I'm talking about. And whenever one says certain names, this scene comes to mind. I think it would be great to try to make a diorama about that. It wouldn't be a cheap one though, but I'll let the rest of that be unsaid. So, would I recommend The Hunt for Nagash, the audio drama series? Yes, I would. Definitely get listening to it. It's a bit expensive. I don't think it's worth the money in the sense of how much you can get an audio book for at a different website contra how much this audio drama costs. 1 hour for the price that Black Library wants is very steep, but the production values are high. I feel fine listening to it again and again, and it's a really interesting story. So I would recommend it. Be a bit price conscious. You're getting 1, 4, or 8 stories depending on how you want to buy it. You'll get some stories off if you buy them in 4s or in 8s. I think it's 1 or 2 stories for free in 4 or 8. So if you're going all in, just buy the pack. But it's really good. I enjoyed listening to this, and I will listen to it several times. And it's It's nice to have something about your hobby in the ears, you know? Something that isn't a podcast, something that is the fiction of the mortal realms, but in audio form. And this is the absolute best there is. So try it out. I really, really recommend it. It's pretty cool.